Okay.
Look, it's the spirit behind me.
So the recording is going, and I'll start off with a roll call. And just if you're, please, when you say present, let us know if you're in person or present virtually. So starting off with the roll call, Seth Barnes.
Present, in person.
Dave Bugney.
Present virtually.
Adam Coble.
Present, in person.
Stacy Detweiler.
Present in person.
Julie Furman.
Present in person.
Wendy Gerlach.
Present in person.
Kate Wells.
Terry, this is Sam Banks with NIMS. I'll be sitting in for Kate virtually.
Great, thank you. Casey Kula.
Present in the room.
Jason Robeson.
Present virtually.
Josh Seeds.
Present in the room.
And then Amanda Sullivan Astor. You think you said she's en route, so
Yeah.
hopefully we'll be there soon. And then William Tucker.
Present virtually.
Okay, great. So just a few things, to help start. So in terms of the agenda today, there's the usual stuff at the beginning, and then here in a couple minutes, we'll get into the question and answer with the IRST co-chairs who are both there. The research agenda framework, we'll discuss that briefly, and then really getting into the research agenda based on the results of the survey and your folks' discussion of that. In terms of housekeeping, just these as a reminder, these are public meetings that are recorded and the recordings will be available online. Please turn your camera on if you are joining the meeting. It helps with discussion and body language and whatnot. And then please mute yourself when you're not speaking if you're joining virtually. So now it's time for public comment. Is there any public comment? Looks like we don't have any public comment. Okay. And then let's see here. The executive summary of the previous two meetings, are we ready to accept those? Are you ready to accept those?
Yes. I think the room is nodding.
Okay, perfect.
We are ready to accept that. Thank you.
All right.
Lucky to do it without Amanda here, so she's going to always catch us the little things that I do. It's true.
Gotcha. Let's see here. So done with public comment yet? And next one, please, after that. There we are. So just updates. Reminder that we're doing amendments to the participation grants to extend the deadline. It's a pretty simple amendment. Most of your organizations have signed them. There's a few that haven't. So you'll hear from me shortly. We're tentatively scheduling a joint IRST AMPC meeting for September. We need to send out another potential suite of dates because we couldn't find one that worked for enough people. And then I want to turn to, we decided it would be a good idea to have updates regularly on the IRST. So I'm going to turn to Sean to give us a brief update on what the IRST is up to. And go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. We, as you know, we completed 2 of the research proposals now, the Eastern Oregon steep slopes and the road stream hydrologic connectivity. I think we're going to both discuss today. We got the initial amphibians questions back from the group, and got you some feedback on those. There's a number of questions. The IRST had clarification questions. So we're hoping to get those back from you folks as soon as you can. To keep us rolling on that topic. Jessica or Kelly, anything else you can think of?
So the primary, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sean.
Terry, sorry, real quick, just want
Go for
to
it.
note that Amanda is now present for the whole
Oh,
call.
great, thank you. Appreciate that.
And is there a way to turn up the volume just a tiny bit? I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. People are chiming in.
Yeah. How's the volume now?
Great.
Good.
Perfect. All right, thank you. Let's go to the next slide.
I get here too.
And so just a reminder, the next meeting is July 7th, and that's a 1.5 hour virtual only meeting with the intent to finalize the research agenda that is due July 15th. That's what's the due date and rule, and that will be a substantial decision. So obviously, most of today is oriented towards reaching that decision on July 7th. So next up is the question and answers with the IRST co-chairs. And I think, Martha, go ahead and stop sharing the PowerPoint. I think it'll be easier to see folks and have the conversation. And I'm going to mute myself and hand it over to Kelly and Jessica. Thank you for showing up.
Sorry, real quick, before we do that, Terry, I just want to make sure, because I think it's important just to think about the timing. So really today, our goal is to come up with a draft list. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're not going to vote on it today, but that I'm going to be kind of pushing this group to get to that point. So then by the July 7th meeting, which is Terry noted, that's only an hour and a half meeting. That will be our vote and sort of final opportunity for discussion. So just keeping that timing in mind, recognizing that is very fast. And trying to frame our questions for Jessica and Kelly around clarity that we might need to help shape that agenda. Wendy, I feel like you have a question.
The reason I'm looking puzzled is just because I was thinking about two other things that we'll be interacting with IRSTM. One was when we're going to address the amphibians questions that they sent back. The second thing was effectiveness monitoring, because I noticed that in our last meeting, we referred to discussing that. So the reason I was throwing my brow was I'm thinking, how we can fit that into, but I would, that was all I was thinking.
Yes, I think, well, we kind of wrestled with that a bit. And since this is the very first time we're going through this process, kind of unclear. I expect that it will take our whole meeting to discuss this draft list. And so given that timeline, we really need to prioritize those, but you raised great points and we'll talk about this more. We should keep in our minds that we also have an active amphibians question. It's not quite right yet to get on this list, but it could be something we could tackle in next year, and similarly for effectiveness monitoring. So we are not probably going to get to either of those today, just so we can get that draft research agenda together. But thank you for continuing to find those, because we don't want to forget them.
Yeah, thank you.
Seth, any other framing?
No, you did it well. I mean, the reality is, yes, we want to get to those Vivian's questions, and I think a lot of, so any pre-work people can do, I think would be useful. But today's meeting is going to be focused on the roads and the Eastern Oregon scoping proposals, and we'll hopefully by the end of this meeting we'll have a good idea of where we're coalescing so that we can get to that agenda item.
Yeah, just touching on that last point about the amphibians and effectiveness monitoring. Amphibians, I mean, we can certainly write the research agenda in a way that leaves that open. I mean, you'll see it in a slide later on, but it's a good idea to allow for some flexibility and alert the board that this is close, relatively speaking, close meaning 6 months, 10 months before the AMPC can come back to the board to amend the research agenda. That's a possibility. And so we can certainly include that as a placeholder, if you will, within the research agenda so that it doesn't fall off, but it's certainly, we can't include it today because we don't have the scoping proposals. That's still a work in progress.
Great, so I think with that,
Sorry, to follow up on these suggestions, it makes me wonder, because we've done a little bit of touching on effectiveness monitoring, a few minutes here, one meeting, a few minutes there. I wonder whether we might need a special meeting, either this summer or into the early fall, where we can actually dig into what are we trying to monitor, what the goal of it is, in a way that it gets us something that we're like ready to present to the board, for example. And I don't know whether a dedicated meeting would be valuable to folks who've been talking about it.
I like that idea. Let's come back
Yeah.
at the end and sort of get a thumbs up, thumbs down, and that makes sense to me, but I also do want to get our list together. So
Yeah.
again, sorry, I'm gonna be pushing a little hard on
I
time.
appreciate it.
And actually, before we jump to Jessica and Kelly, are you both planning to leave at 1:30, or are you planning to stick around a little bit after? I just want to frame questions. I'm available to stay long. If that's it. And then I think we had scheduled about an hour, could be a little bit less, especially if you are kindly able to stay and we can ask you questions as we're working through all the options a little more. I think that would be great. I think maybe you both are gonna kind of walk through the proposals a little bit. Maybe we want to dive right into questions. Remember how we structured that.
These are
Yeah.
context question. So as I've been thinking about the questions I wanted to ask you guys, which is fun. I've been tracking you guys' meetings. Just for my own sake, as I've been reading through the proposals, I'm trying to understand with, that initial schematic that we had of like this step, it can go back up here and then it goes back down and all that stuff. Just trying to think, once we select the specific option in each proposal, and then it goes onto the research agenda and an RFP is created, is there any other opportunity for this body, the policy body, to engage or do anything once it's on the research agenda? Or is it like hands off, we don't engage at all at that point in how the RFP is worded, or having additional questions or any interface? Just as I'm trying to frame, what the questions that I have within the proposals. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe Gary can help me, but our goal is for the July 16th AMC to bring our list to the board as a draft. And then the Board of Forestry will vote on the research agenda at their September meeting. So I don't know that there's a formal structure for more interaction between us and the board between then. Looking at Terry, I mean, I guess we haven't really discussed the mechanics of how that will be presented to the board.
Right. So I can get into the mechanics of how that's presented to the board a little bit later when I talk about the research framework. But I also, to address your question, Amanda, there's nothing in rule about once the board approves the research agenda, the intent is that goes directly to the IRST to implement through RFPs. That's sort of the plan. Having said that, if the IRST were to have questions, I mean, it's not out of, they could certainly come back to the AMPC if there were questions. But the intent certainly, when this research agenda is approved by the board, that it's clear enough for the IRST to take it and run with it, develop RFPs and a work plan and run with implementing it. Does that clarify the situation for that aspect of it?
Yeah, I just think there's, we'll get into this more as we talk about the specifics about the proposals and the options, but there's a lot of nuance, detail that the IRST probably can't even answer as far as how research will be conducted. And we all know, depending on, your assumptions and your methodologies, and then your analysis tool of developing the actual results and the different statistical significances and everything, all of that impacts the end point of the research. And so there's just a lot of ambiguity, I think, still, even though we are very detailed. You guys have been very detailed in the proposals. So that helps me as I think about the specificity I want to ask and the different types of questions about the proposal. So that's helpful.
Then, I don't know. I have a little sign on my head. Particularly given where we are so early in this process, I would hope that once we get the information back from the board and we start preparing a proposal, a request for proposal, that we would have the opportunity to run it by you all just for some sort of gut check. Is, are we hitting the mark? Are we not? The details, I don't expect you all to be involved, but certainly at a higher level. And I'm just off the cuff here, so Jessica, I don't know what your thoughts are.
I think that makes sense too. I mean, that's obviously a piece that we haven't done yet too. So getting, I think, feedback's important. And there's also thinking about how we might structure part of the RFP is to ensure whoever's actually conducting the work has check-in points back with at least the IRST, right? Here's our progress reports, and that gives us the opportunity to maybe discuss or raise any questions or kind of minor changes in direction that we might need to take, for example.
Well, you'll to remind me again if you had something planned to say, or we can jump into questions. I feel like this group probably has a bunch of framing backgrounds.
So I think we were just thinking about maybe pulling up to the table, like that shows the options for each one. So that's probably, it seems to be where the questions were, is like, how these options were, yeah, some of our survey options too. So that's
That's all.
You got this? Yeah, which, do we want to start with any particular one?
Let's start with the Eastern Oregon steep slopes, maybe just a couple minutes to kind of run through that, and then we'll open it up for some questions. I'm gonna try to make sure everyone gets a chance to ask a question and also try to time track, so we have also time to talk about the roads piece.
Yeah, so if you go to the executive summary there and scroll down to the bottom of that executive summary, there'll be a table there. Which, of course, the text is very small.
Thank you.
Get rid of that toolbar on the left.
I'm remembering correctly, Terry, we did send, there was a back and forth on these options with the IRST, right? Did we send you questions on this? Yeah, so as a reminder, partly for myself, we have had a little more chance to ask about the Eastern Oregon and not so much on the road. So we may want to tilt our questions to that piece.
great. Question? Is it time for questions?
I think that- Let's dive in, Wendy.
Yeah. In reading these, there's both of them mention focus on important gaps in knowledge regarding the steep slopes. And I was just kind of curious about that because that is relevant, of course, but I was thinking that the primary focus would be on simply answering the questions, which I thought of as, define, like looking at our questions and answering them. And in addition, there will be gaps in knowledge, but I was curious about that language.
I just did that one.
Do you see what I'm trying to ask? Oh, okay.
I just tried a few things.
In my opinion, the importance of these reviews is to provide you all with an understanding or to provide decision makers beyond just in the room with an understanding of the state of the science. And integral to that is to identify the gaps in case you all want to move forward and filling those gaps. So for example, on the west side, the science is very strong. We know a lot about how debris flows initiate, run out, and the impacts. But that information, once we did a literature review, I would assume that there would be gaps in that understanding. It's, based on the initial literature review that we've done, we know that there clearly are going to be gaps. And so if you all wanted to propose any changes right now, there are no provisions for managing around steep slopes in Eastern Oregon. So if you all were interested in doing that, those gaps would allow you to identify where you might want to put emphasis if you needed additional information to develop any policy changes. And so that's, to me, one of the main reasons that we would identify or provide you all with where the gaps in knowledge are. So if you did want to produce some sort of policy change or suggest a policy change, it would be essential to know how far you can take that.
And so part of my question was about the relative emphasis on the sort of the non-gap, the information that can be found in research and answer our question, and then the gap. So to me, just as I was reading it, sounded sort of focused on the gaps. And I was just wondering if that's just because that's the way I read it. What would you say your relative focus would be in terms of identifying either existing information that is clear or research that can be done to add data and knowledge, and then gaps where you can't find it? That's my question.
Clearly it was clear to me, I'm sorry, that we would be providing information to answer your questions.
Yeah.
That would be the primary. And as part of that answer, those gaps would be identified for you.
Okay, that's all I was wondering.
Yes, sorry about that.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, the way I'm thinking about it too is in some of these areas, there may not be a lot of public or published information. So this is a way to sort of give confidence in the review. So for some of these types of reviews higher up in this chart, gap identification sort of built into the process to conduct that too.
And so that's one of the trade-offs that, if you selected a descriptive review, you identifying those gaps would be less of a key outcome of that. They may show up, but they're not part of the process.
Other questions on
So in kind of reading the difference between the systematic map and the systematic review, there was no systematic review that was suggested. I think systematic mapping was the highest level. Does the systematic mapping and the rapid review both include a statistical assessment of data or identifying confidence in the data that is available? Or do either of those, or do neither of them?
Yeah, me too.
They both would have some level of confidence in. And then kind of following on that, as it relates to the systematic map and the gray research, Does there was more left unsaid maybe than said about how gray research would be incorporated into the final results. And I'm wondering what you guys are thinking about, if there's any other color as far as sideboards, or thinking about how it may be used here but not appropriate in other, other research we do down the line. This is kind of unique and specific to this one, where there may be more great research in places like Washington, where they have more of these east side slope type areas and monitoring reports and things that wouldn't be peer reviewed. So what are you guys thinking about as far as your knowledge of great research out there, and how it may or may not be have kind of associated sideboards with it?
Yeah, it's a good question, that one that we spent a lot of time talking about. I guess, sort of off the cuff there. So one benefit to the systematic reviews is that it upfront sets out that there are certain parameters you need to meet in terms of its kind of like statistical validity or sample size things to get incorporated into a quantitative analysis. So that in itself may exclude some of the gray literature that could fall into like a descriptive review, for example.
And I think also the rapid review, one of the differences is we would spend, or whoever would spend less time searching out that great literature. So go down lots of rabbit holes looking for it that you might not be worth the effort.
I mean, I would say that Sean spent a lot of time kind of digging into this already. So Sean, I don't know if you want to comment on this too, that I feel like we actually did a pretty comprehensive literature review for this.
Yeah, a lot of it was gray. And so that's kind of the trade-off that, if they're not going to find a whole lot more, traditional peer-reviewed literature, you have to decide, well, is that great literature good enough? And I think, with careful reading, you can make those judgments. But right now, I think if we do a literature review, a lot of the additional things we turn up would be great literature. So
I wouldn't expect that we missed a whole lot of information out there, for example.
Yes, thank you. So to your comment, Kelly, about so I have two questions, I guess. Maybe I'll just go with the second one first. In the scoping, it notes, at least in the executive summary, third paragraph down, road impacts on shallow, rapid landslides were not considered for the primary and secondary focus questions. And can you help me understand why you didn't? And mostly the question of why they weren't considered is in the context of the secondary focus is on forest practices, because the first question is around timber harvest, but the second one is about forest practices writ large. And I think road building is considered a forest practice, right? And at least on the west side, that seems to be an important part of shallow, rapid landslides. Yeah, I'm missing something. Yeah, sorry.
As you point out, the primary focus specific to timber harvesting, the secondary focus was other hill slope processes and, a broader focus on forest practices. But, as the results indicate, there just weren't that many processes that turned up. So, I think if you all wanted roads to be included, that would be something that you could come back to us and say that you wanted roads to be included, but that was not, that's how we interpreted it to begin with. And I don't remember at this point if there was back and forth between you all and us around that issue. I'd have to go back. I don't know.
remember.
Yeah. And Sean, I don't know if you would do either, so.
Yeah, I thought there was some idea that the original PFA authors really were focused on harvesting effects and not on road effects for this one, but I don't think there's anything specific to point to there.
Do you want to add or do you have a question?
Question. But yeah, I'll save my, no, that's good. I'll save my second.
So just trying to understand the difference between the systematic review and the rapid review. So the systematic review, it mentions the drivers of mass wasting processes and the covered species. Do you anticipate that of expanding the body of literature? I have a follow-up question to that.
No, I don't think so. I mean, like I said, I think Sean did a pretty good job examining what's out there besides some great literature down some deep dark holes that didn't pop up easily. I don't think there's going to be a lot more found.
Okay.
Particularly not as it relates to covered species, if that's kind of what your focus was.
Well, just the mass wasting processes that it's not mentioned in the rapid review. It's I think trying to understand like the differences between the two and why it's the time frame so different, costs.
Yeah, I don't see that those two being different around mass wasting processes. I mean, that really wasn't an intention to distinguish the two options based on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think if we take a stab at doing this, please, Kelly and Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, like one of the differences is basically when are you gonna cut off your search into the gray literature? The full systematic map gives you more time and effort to do things like extract data from mapping databases or something like that, where the rapid systematic map is gonna be have maybe stronger sight words to use your
I'm
term
gonna cut out that green literature soon.
at some point. Yeah, is that, am I characterizing that correctly, Sean?
Yeah, yeah, and then just the kind of the rigor of review, you know, these fuller systematic reviews really get careful about recording everything. Where did you search it? What did you find? You know, what got accepted, what got rejected? You have multiple people doing it, right, to kind of get comparison between person consistency there, which the more rapid one you wouldn't.
Okay, thanks. That's all.
You have a follow-up or?
No, based on the answer, there's no follow-up.
Yes. I said Julie and then Josh.
So this was an area that I had questions about too, figuring out the difference between the two. And there's like 6 bullets on pages 25 and 26 that were kind of helpful to me in understanding, at least thinking that I understood. So I don't know if it'd be helpful for others to look at that as well.
It's under the worksheet.
3.3.
You can do, I think you can do a control G. Oh, that's Adobe.
25 to 26. It kind of spans the page break. Down to 3.3. Right here. And then go down, yeah. So part of it is, yeah, exactly. Right there, right there. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Split.
Would you like us to kind of go through those points and explain them a little further?
Yeah, I was just check with Julie. Did you have a question or were you?
No, I was just suggesting that
Okay.
might be helpful for the conversation.
I think a second to look at it, but maybe Josh, you're up next.
Thanks. Yeah, so my question is, the full systematic map mentions compiling existing empirical databases for future use. So there's description of doing quantitative narrative synthesis, is that, are we talking a meta-analysis, or are we talking more like, just taking the numbers from different papers and presenting them, or would the full map have a meta-analysis to it? And the map would not. I'm trying to figure out what it means to compile available empirical data set.
So, I want to step back a second. We're not talking about a systematic review in any of this. One is a systematic map and one's a rapid systematic map. And so in the systematic review, you would be targeting the effectiveness of a specific intervention. And that's really not the way the questions were phrased. So they're phrased more generally. And so a systematic map becomes more appropriate. And so in terms of a meta-analysis, I don't think the way the questions are phrased would lead to a meta-analysis. But I think that you could do some more quantitative assessment of the information if there is enough information to really sort that out. And I'm not sure that there is. So.
And what are some examples of uses for compiling databases for?
I mean, I think that basically just like pulling the data together and archiving it in case you wanted to explore it more fully in the future. And I say someone wanted to explore.
Like if someone wanted to do some geomorphic modeling or something to that effect, the data would be there, posted online at the IRSD website and available.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, that's helpful.
And I think to give a sense of where there's data gaps and where we already have some data that may be relevant to the issue to answering these questions.
Before we go to Amanda, I just want to check online. Any questions, Dave, Will, Jason?
Thank you, but no.
No, thanks.
Not right now.
I had a question about kind of that 1 and 2 around the workshops and then the definition of experts. For the workshops, what are you guys envisioning as far as the synthesis of those workshops? How would kind of the conversations at those workshops then be incorporated into the literature review, or would it be more to compile other knowledge sources that maybe were missed in the initial or database searches, or what are you guys curious about that? And then as far as the experts being consulted, who's defining who is and is not an expert? Curious about those things.
I think given how difficult it was for us to find information, that we would draw on experts to identify information sources that could be used in the review, and how the experts are identified themselves. I mean, I think that we would cast a wide net. I think, Adam, the way you searched for literature when you did the literature review that.
Disturbance.
Yeah, disturbance is something similar to that. We would look to the broader community to identify who the experts were and then bring them in. So.
I think at this level of the scope and proposal, we don't have the details for exactly what that looks like, and that would be identified during our process.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of why I asked that initial question, because I mean, obviously I'm representing a regulated community. And so some of the conversations earlier, Kelly brought up about, does this lead to rulemaking, right? That's kind of the big elephant in the room about anything we do with NPC. And I think about what we're gonna draw on to make those decisions. And I would prefer those to be made via peer reviewed, highest level of expertise. And so some of the casting of really wide net of, I think about there's a lot of community science out there that happens that could be incorporated at some point. I don't want to set a precedent that we're utilizing, what standard we're utilizing that could set a precedent for the rest of our work with this group. So that's just to air out my thoughts and being, full transparency. That's where I'm kind of trying to gather more information. Like I said, I know we don't know it all because we haven't done an RFP and we haven't gone through the process, so.
And one of the benefits of using a systematic process is that you evaluate each piece of data. It doesn't, you're not bringing in disparate sources and trying to give them equal weight. And so, but we would want to cast a wide net to make sure that we're not missing important pieces of information. Yeah.
I'll start shifting us to roads, but we'll look around and see if there's any final questions on this one. And I do have one myself.
I'm good. It's been very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I guess
And
just to jump a tiny bit ahead, and we'll talk more about sort of the pre-survey work and developer doing that. It was slightly imperfect, but we'll talk more about that. I think it was still useful for us just to get a little sense of whether there was alignment. And there was more alignment around those first two options, the full systematic and the rapid systematic review. So I guess I'm just curious if there's anything we should know as we think about probably those two options right to the top, any like key difference or key consideration, or if we walk out of this meeting today, what do you think? I really wish I had said, Nancy, you should think about anything there may not be in. Just curious.
I mean, my thought is it's a cost benefit analysis. And so are you willing to double the price and potentially not receive a lot more information from that?
Yeah, and I would agree.
to Josh's question though about the empirical databases, I do wonder, Josh, but then to the two of you, just the potential value of kind of gathering some of this data in an environment where it feels like things go offline, especially in the last 130 days that we didn't expect to. Do you have any thoughts about that while they're here and thinking about it?
I'm just thinking, like, we see a lot of students from, OSU, PSU, University of Oregon that are looking for master's projects, particularly like master's projects that involve less field research and more data modeling. So if we have, this description of the physical processes, and then we have also, the available field data, then that becomes a source for like projects that are based on geomorphic modeling using, like lab or whatever that graduate student might be interested in, and it could lead to further inquiry. And I also just like the transparency of it as well. And that one has more reviewers, which I think I trust the IRST to get a good reviewer or reviewers if it's a rapid systematic map, but humans are human, and so more eyes is probably better.
If we see some mistake.
Yeah, everyone's got their me filters on, and they have to run everything through their own brain. So I don't know. I think there's advantages, but having open available compiled data for future use, I think would be helpful. And if there's questions or gaps that to modeling, or there's data available so people know if they want to do field studies, how to target it better. There's advantages there for future science when I was modeling.
Sorry, that I didn't mean that. Yeah, it did not co-chairs.
One last, since Kelly and Jessica are gonna stay with us, we can ask more questions, but one more and then we're gonna shift around.
As I think about the cost benefit analysis, there's definitely pieces I like of both the rapid and the full systematic. Is there any opportunity to take pieces and create a Frankenstein version. That isn't, one or two, but like 1B or something like that. And within that, and this could be a future, conversation towards the end of today, as we kind of think through the actual costs of what we decide to choose. I guess, and again, maybe you don't have to answer the question right now, but I'm just thinking about, are there specific pieces that added a lot of cost to it? Like, as we look at this kind of 1 through 6, if we added something to the rapid from the full systematic, it'd be nice to know, oh, well, actually doing that was the majority of that excess cost, or, that obviously they don't have that level of breakdown. That was probably the intent in the proposal, but just thinking about some of that stuff. So I don't know if you have just a quick response.
I mean, I think we can do what you guys want us to do, right? So like, if we want to do the rapid, but add other reviewers or something like that, we can certainly come up with what that price tag would be, but I don't know how specific we were in developing these. It's a big challenge, right? You understand exactly what is the appropriate cost for each of these, which is why they're pretty wide.
Yeah.
Good question. I think that's gonna be super relevant for the roads piece too. So, that transition. Oh, you're welcome. We could love. Also, we can look at that speed table or similar to that.
The roads.
And this one, we,
It's page 9.
one is newer to us, and we haven't had sort of the back and forth with IRST. I know that Terry collected some questions from us individually that were sent to the IRST, so maybe those are shared with you to give you a sense of where everyone is. But I think, again, just looking at time here, gonna aim for about 30 minutes of questions on this one. Then we'll take a quick break, get back into it. So just to give everyone, we'll have more opportunity to dive into this one as well. But with that, let's open it up. What questions we have? Kelly.
You all provided that list of questions. I don't know if it would be helpful to just go through the list or just take additional questions now. I mean, whatever.
I think just given timing that hopefully everyone has their list, and if they wanted to prioritize them, I think that's the way we would do it. Alternatively, if there's like a theme that everyone was asking you about a particular piece, that might be helpful to touch on as well. Like I can imagine that we probably all kind of collectively want to understand the pre-survey options. Are they kind of mix and match? Does one go with another?
I can take that question.
Okay, sure.
The pre-survey options basically are neither of the primary options require a pre-survey option. What the pre-survey options do is allow you to reduce the time that you spend in the field and to better target where you go. And so the first pre-survey option would just allow you to better select where you're putting your effort in the field. And so you would need a good road layer and you need a good stream layer. I think we're pretty confident in the quality of the stream layer. So that would not need a whole lot of effort to validate. I know there are problems with the stream layer. There's no doubt about that, but we're not gonna, get an improved stream layer. So it is what it is basically, but we would have an idea of some characterization of the accuracy of that. And I don't think that that's been done yet. And then the road layer is much more problematic. And so if you decided not to select pre-survey option 1 and do a better characterization of the road layer, then your selection of sites is going to have to be basically, you're not going to be able to use a watershed-based approach. We would be back to basically using the approach that Dubé et al. Used in the block design. And then you also would not be able to focus, which I think is important, on those. There are a lot of areas out there on the roads that have no potential at all to interact with streams. And by selecting the pre-survey option 1, that allows you to target those that are close to streams that actually may have some connection to, some hydrologic connection, which you're going to spend a lot of time out in the field unless you do that, just surveying areas that have no possibility of delivering water or sediment to streams. So that's the advantage of doing that. And then option 2, you need to collect, particularly if you're going to do the sediment modeling, you need to collect a lot of information about each road segment. And if much of that can be done from GIS rather than having to go out in the field and measure a bunch of, use survey equipment and measure a bunch of metrics that you can easily get from GIS, then that allows you to identify or survey more sites, expand your sample size, and increase your power to detect. So that's the advantage of doing that.
Just real quick clarifying, thank you, that was very helpful. So the survey option 1, the hydrologic only, does go with the pre-survey option? Or are they?
Both. I mean, you could, a pre-survey option 1 could go with 1 or 2. And then pre-survey option 2 could actually go with 1 or 2, but it has you get the greatest bang for your buck with that if you're going to do the sediment modeling.
Right, but also is there some efficiencies, for example, right? How do we make sure the fields that you're covering the way it's most efficient? And then there's also basically an unknown level of error associated with the GIS layer. So this would give us a way to kind of understand, are there particular geographic areas, landowner types where the bias is a little bit different? It's like my understanding of the ODF road layer is sort of a patchwork of what the landowners are sending in. So it's kind of based on what the landowner has. So you might think of it almost like this, some landowners are going to have really good LiDAR-based road networks, others may not. So there's kind of some, you're trying to figure out the areas of a road that's close to a stream, want to know that the road is accurately defined.
Yeah, they sounded good ideas, those options 1 and 2 of the pre-survey options. It sounds to me like they might pay for themselves, so you have a cost in there, but would you at least that amount saved from the quote that's above for survey options? It's probably hard to have.
It's hard to know.
Within your judgment, it sounds like when you're saying the increasing efficiency and the amount of them, it's not a huge amount in comparison to the bill for the larger project. It sounds like they might be wise. It's not worrying about the cost of that pre-survey option because you probably get your money back in terms of efficiency. Sort of quick. That might be possible.
I think I think it might be possible. You could also, if you undertook particularly pre-survey, either one of those options, the road layer may not be usable. So if the road layer isn't usable to help identify and target your field sampling, you could have spent $30,000 to assess it and then either have to get a better road layer or still go out in the field and collect the data. that you are, you know.
The road layer you're referencing is ODF's
Mhm.
road layer.
Yeah, I mean, so again, we can't assess exactly where it's biased or how much bias it is, but I don't think it's wholesale wrong either, right? Because these are the road layers that the landowners are using. These are the road layers that ODF is using too. Just in some places, there will be some error associated with them. And it's variable, it sounds like. It'll be very, yeah.
And then we would all just have to decide whether or not it's usable to better target streamliner. The stream sampling, excuse me, the sampling there. And then with the pre-survey option 2, you know, again, if it worked out, the road layer was accurate enough, the stream layer was accurate enough, and you could use that, yes, I think it would, if you all decide to go with option 2, the primary option 2, then yes, I do think that would save a lot of, quite a lot of time. So.
Sean and Adam at the same time. Sean, right
I was just gonna maybe add something in here that I don't know if we ever really discussed explicitly in the RST, but is it to some degree just a matter of timing when these things might happen, these pre-options? So they could be built into one of the other options and the contractor could do the whole thing. But was it your impression that we were thinking about these as we could do these quicker and before kind of the main options get implemented to get some more information and kind of set things up? So these could be done as kind of separate RFPs instead of being, you know, potentially part of the larger options.
I mean, I think that, you know, I think we proposed having ODF or some other agency, state agency do pre-survey option 1. And, you know, if before an RFP went out, so you could better target, you know, the RFP. The pre-survey option 2 is a bit more of a research project. And so, you know, although I think there's a very strong literature support for going that way, it's still, there's some proof of concept and some just operationalizing some of the elements that you need to apply it broadly is what we're proposing. And so whether or not you would want to delay the primary RFP to do that work first or incorporate that as part of the RFP, I mean, that would be that's a primary question there, so.
I think a value of doing particularly the pre-survey option 2 these prior to developing the RFPs, it'll really give you a better sense of what's the sample size you need, right? To have that estimate of variability baked in.
Adam and then Julie and then Josh.
Question about the second option for the sediment modeling, assuming that there would be some type of field data collection to test the model or validate the model. What would happen if the model isn't performing that well? I mean, what would the option be then forward?
I mean, yeah, I don't know that I have an answer for that. I mean, this is definitely at the edge of my expertise here.
Sure.
But I mean, what I understand is like a lot of these models don't perform very well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I think that's kind of maybe what I'm getting at is like the point of the modeling, the getting sort of that total sediment load, I think is going to be pretty challenging. Now, if the model is used to compare sites, for example, like a reference site versus where there's logging activity or whatever, I think that's one thing, because that comparison you're not relying on sort of that one outcome, right, of like however many cubic, whatever.
The tons per square meter or square mile.
Yeah, so, that's kind of a detailed question, but I feel like that's an important outcome to consider here.
And I think that outputs of the models can be used just as you were saying, you can look at them relative, rank sites relative to one another, or you can put a lot of faith in the actual absolute values that you're getting for the models. And, I don't know that any of these models have been calibrated sufficiently to try to put much faith in the absolute values. But I think, relatively speaking, you could compare the outputs from time step 1 to time step 2 and say, we've reduced the overall sediment load by going out and doing the restorations that we're interested in. So, yeah.
The general trends.
Yes, right. And not, yeah.
And I'd just add to that, local calibration is really important for these models from, our initial research. And there is more of that happening now in Washington. They're doing a whole calibration study. We had Kathy Dubé came and spoke at one of our meetings and was talking about that work. So there will be some more local calibration work available. But at the same time, like Kelly and Jessica were saying, a lot of what we saw in the literature was, in any specific location, the model can be way off because of some local factor.
Yeah.
But it also does give you it operates a bit differently than just hydrology alone. You might have a place that's hydrologically does not seem to be contributing a lot of water, but maybe contributing, disproportionate amount of sediment. So it's just kind of an estimate on another contribution there that operates on a somewhat different, potentially different set of local conditions.
Julie, you had yours up.
Yeah, I guess that's a question. So, you had spoken about that we might do this effort on pre-survey option 2 and then find out if the roads layer just isn't good enough to use. We end up having to do it. But also from what you said about the variability of the quality of the data there, if 80% of it was good enough to use, would there still be an advantage of using that to collect those variables and then saying we're going to have to send for these other areas where we don't have as good information?
Yeah, you probably coming from a little bit of a biased perspective of for, but I think our road flare is pretty good, right? So
I would imagine that.
yeah, so there's gonna be
More resources probably have the adequate data.
I think it's
Yeah.
small landowners for probably every piece of this is gonna be our challenge. Is how do we small landowners? So that might just take some additional focus, for example.
So I think I might have the pre-survey option 2, doing the road characteristics from GIS. I'm presuming that has like a field truthing quality assurance component that's included in that. We're just going to be going out and looking at some subsample to make sure that what the GIS analysis is kicking out is actually fitting what's there when you measure it with the laser level and tape. Okay. Is there on survey option 2 with the sediment modeling? I've done some of this, and I think part of the issue is that often sediment transport, including on roads, is very episodic. It's like not, it's driven by big events. And what I found doing some of this was good for kind of relative information. Oh, this is a crappy segment. That segment's okay. Or these kind of interventions will reduce, modeled reduction, show significant modeled reductions from this bad segment. Is there, so, I mean, that could be useful. But probably field foresters already know those segments and are watching them all the time and grumbling about them. So is there a particular model or models in mind for doing that sediment modeling and trying to get those loads? And, you know, in terms of directing management and directing management to reduce actual environmental impact, what's the, you know, do you think there's a significant gain in having sediment modeling versus just knowing which segments are connected and need more attention? So we learn from this connection. So I guess those two questions, which are there particular models in mind for this? And then is there enough of a utility here that in terms of directing on the ground management that we would get something environmentally at expense?
There are a variety of models that, you know, we considered and decided that the best approach would be to allow whoever was responding to the RFP to propose.
Use one.
Yes, but you know, things like great light and the model, I can't remember the model, the debate.
More stuff.
Yeah. You know, those sort of rose to the top as we were discussing, so. I think Mike Furness has spent a lot of time with the Great Light model.
That's what I used.
Okay, yeah. So, so rather than just, you know, forcing somebody to use a particular model, then justify it, doesn't justify.
That's kind of what I would anticipate is they would respond to the RFP and say, we think we should use this model because reasons X, Y, and Z.
At least it's X, Y, Z that we're really have a lot of practice with it.
Probably. So we know, yeah. I guess to your other piece, I don't know that you're gonna gain a lot of identifying problem areas and solutions directed at those problem areas from version 2 versus version 1. I think you're spot on, right? Field foresters know where the problem areas are. And you can identify those the first option and try to monitoring too.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
The one potential, and this really, we have, you know, we didn't respond to question 3, and that's related to the effectiveness and the effects on, you know, the aquatic ecosystem. The sediment piece might give you a little bit more understanding as it relates to the impacts to the things that we actually care about. But, you know, yeah, so that would be one advantage of going with the sediment. But like I said, right now, we're not even addressing question 3. So, but longer term, you may be much more interested in doing that.
Or go to Julie and Amanda. Anyone online? Any questions?
Nope, not
Justin.
this time.
I think I said. Oh, go ahead, Terry.
Just an FYI, Jason had to step out to another meeting. He hopefully will be back later, but he's not here for the moment. FYI.
Great. Thanks, Terry. I think I saw Julie and then Amanda.
So, just to kind of echo some of the things, that others have been saying about the difficulty and efficacy of trying to model, sediment load. Recently for something unrelated, I was having conversations with several people who are very experienced in doing that at USGS, and they were unanimous in strongly advising us not to try and model sediment loads, just because it's so variable, and they said you'll spend a ton of money and you won't end up with anything new that you know. They suggested, and I'm sorry, this is a little bit in the weeds, but I wasn't sure where else to interject it. But just setting up a series of cameras with a, you know, a bar across the stream that's got, you know, a background, and stream level, and they said you get more out of that than you would from, and spend, you know, 10 or less of the money. So, another reason potentially to.
Ask each question. So when you say they put a bar in the stream to show steep stream level, like I'm not quite seeing how that relates to.
Well, okay, so it might be useful to know what the stream flow is at the time that you're seeing the color come up. So the idea is just by looking at color, you're gonna get as much as you would from doing
Oh, I
a
see.
sediment
Okay.
load model, right? And so it's like, okay, this spot turns really brown, and it does so at this level of flow, and you know, create some kind of spatial model from that. So.
Yeah.
As it relates to the sediment modeling, the other thing I've been thinking about is at what point are we kind of crossing over into compliance monitoring versus effectiveness monitoring? Because we already have requirements to now, you know, disconnect streams from ditch water and things like that. So, so I kind of get concerned about where we might be crossing the line as well, where we're not just focused on effectiveness, but we are crossing over to compliance. And I don't know if we're close to that in some of this sediment modeling stuff or not. But I feel pretty confident with the hydrologic connectivity pieces and kind of how that's been outlined, and you know, what do we know, what's happening kind of, you know, at these given moments. Because I would agree with Josh that there's good foresters out there, there's good operators. Operators do stuff well before anybody else is out there a lot of times as well. That's why a lot of people actually get operator of the year awards. They're doing stuff like that and unplugging culverts and really taking proactive steps to try to make sure that, you know, the brown stuff isn't going in the blue stuff. So, so yeah, I mean, it's interesting what everybody's kind of bringing to the table, because I'm definitely not an expert in sediment modeling or anything like that. And, so some really fascinating anecdotes. So, but yeah, I wonder about that at what point. It's a kind of a fuzzy line sometimes. Yeah.
And Julie, I raised my hand, but, you know, as you're saying, if you all want an estimate of sediment and the potential effects, there are a lot of ways to get at it. And you just brought up a great one, you know, so, if that is something that you all would want to pursue, then that is certainly something that we could make sure happened. So, and he wanted to bring in something beyond just the physical connection.
Not going through the RFP process yet, it's hard for us to have a good sense, like, are we gonna get 2 organizations in line, or are we gonna get a dozen? But our hope is that we get, you know, several, with probably some interesting, innovative approaches that maybe we haven't even thought about.
But if you don't put sediment in the mix, then, you know, an RFP wouldn't include that, you know, and it may not, you all may decide it's not a direction that you want to head, and of course, that's perfectly fine.
I see what you did. Put sediment in the mix.
So I had just a follow-up. If we chose survey option one, you know, they probably would at least pre-survey one and probably what's the pre-survey options. But if we just did survey option one, that would give us the information that we would need if later on we said, you know what, we want to do that sediment modeling. Let's go back and look at the hydrologic connectivity data and the road characteristics to do like, right? We would be able to, if we decided that after we saw the results of the survey, hey, we need those relative sediment estimates. Would it be possible to then go back and do that based on the data collected? Survey option one with the assistance of survey options.
I think that would be another 1B.
Yeah.
Because you have to make sure you collect that additional data that you needed for the sediment modeling.
Yeah, okay.
So it would require some more effort.
All right, yeah, so the answer is no. Doing survey option one. So to bit later. So.
That's correct.
Since I was thinking kind of a 2B, which would be asking for connectivity and sediment modeling, but have the RFPs ask for proposals for efficient gathering of sediment information. And then at that, seeing what came back, we could see if we got something that seemed like an efficient, low dollar way of getting that. If we didn't, we could say, okay, we will maybe move to what you were just saying, thinking of maybe doing it in the future, or a way of gathering information that would make doing it in the future easier.
Maybe not specify it as tons of sediment and make it a little bit
Yes,
broader
yes.
so that we can approach it in different ways.
That might also get us further towards both the goods monitoring framework strategy and also question 3. Reset.
Amanda, then I'm gonna ask for, we got any final questions? Then we'll take a quick break and we'll come back.
Great. I have one just as it relates to sediment. I do want to be really careful too, because this question and this proposal is really about hydrologic connectivity focused on roads. And so the more we sort of get away from that, we think about sedimentation in streams in general and less from cause. You know, that becomes challenging from a forest practices perspective and how things get applied. So just want to kind of put that out there. You know, if maybe cart before the horse sort of a thing. The second thing that I just want to highlight, and I don't know if this was just like a written wrong in the Scobie rules, there are a few places where it says like FPRs and like the RFPs, I think. Oh. Letters are in the wrong place. But in addition to that, under option 1, under baseline status and trends analysis on page 16, in the middle paragraph, yeah, page 16, the last sentence says data from FRIA and RCAs would help identify road segments affected by these post-rule changes, which then could either be dropped from the sample or assumed connected in the baseline, which seemed backwards to me. It seems like if they were done in the FRIA, or, you know, something was completed post-rule change, that you would assume disconnect, right? Or are you saying that because they were included in a FRIA, they're identified as a problem, then they're assumed disconnected? It just, that sentence was a little bit confusing to me.
Oh, they're assumed disconnected, is that what you mean?
Well, I guess it just depends on this whole sentence was confusing.
I had a question around that too, actually, whether it was, if there were cost effectiveness, efficiency, benefits of, because in the first 5 years of FRIA, right, landowners will be identifying the large, landowners will be identifying roads that are probably ones that we would want to look at in this context. I forget the list of 6 or 7 things, but likely connected, contributing sediment. Was that, I mean, they're a little bit different, so I wasn't sure if there were synergies there, and I think that's kind of similar to what you were asking thoughts on those, because landowners will be doing that work. There's a different time scale. There's a different, you know, not sort of prescribed in rule what they're reporting on, which may not line up with what you would want to sample in this.
Let me address, Amanda, your question, your initial question. I think, you know, the way the questions were put to us is like you want a baseline, a pre-PFA baseline. And so to do that, you know, you need to, if the FRIA information is coming in and roads have been fixed, then you have to assume that they were a problem. And so that's why we would assume, if you want that pre-PFA baseline, that they were connected to begin with. And so that's why it's worded that way.
Yeah, sort of a couple sentences earlier, it's talking about high conservation value sites.
So that's ensuring landowners get credit for FRIA-based work that was already done before the field.
Yes.
The field surveys for this were done.
Yes.
Because that work is driven by the PFA and the FRIA process, but they're getting it done.
And it says either drop from the sample or assume connected, so drop in the sample
Oh,
would be that it's
in the
already,
baseline,
it's already,
yeah.
yeah. And thus gets a big one.
It was connected, now it's not.
I think you're getting credit for that.
Yeah, and that's,
Well, I mean, that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
They're doing the work and it's not the baseline, it's like they never.
Right, they never accomplished that, yeah.
They never accomplished that.
And so- and so when at time step 2, when you go out, you know, you would get the survey or the credit for having done that work, because then those areas would be disconnected. So you'd show up.
Yeah, I just think about, I'm not a large landowner, so I don't know what's included in all that FRIA information. So I don't know if it's fair to assume that it is connected, and that's the reason why it was included. I don't know, Seth, if you know about that process or.
It goes back to that sentence, 2 sentences before.
What's your specific question? I'm trying to track what you're, I think I kind of,
Well, I'm trying to understand how FRIA and RCA data would or would not be used, or how the RFP would, or the conversations would direct kind of the methodology around.
RCA is gonna be more difficult because the information is not. I mean, as much as ODF is trying to make it, especially for the hydrologic connection, that's a more, how would you say, that's a more nuanced analysis than whether my pipe is rusted out at the bottom. Right? So the most small forest landowners, I think, are pretty, they're good at understanding whether the pipe is functioning, how much or how little their system is connected to the, I think that's gonna be really, really hit and miss. So it's unclear to me to the extent that RCA will be useful in this exercise.
Yeah, well, that kind of gets back to that initial question I had of like, well, I really want to know what the methodology is, right, for the study that we do not have, because we don't have an RFP. So it's like, maybe it's not as, it's kind of irrelevant because it's not, this piece doesn't help us determine which option we want to take. It's just those specifics around the methodology and how things are set up that start to get really important, especially when we're talking about potential rule changes or, addressing things in the future that affect the people that I represent. So
I think everything that Stacy said around timing, I mean, this is a challenge, right? It was a challenge that was identified in Dubay and Washington too. So we're just trying to be cognizant of this. Is there a place that we can leverage information coming through FRIA or other programs? Yeah. Or just how do we incorporate that information and improvements into the baseline? We can't say exactly how yet, right?
Well, that's where it's like, I wonder if that's more of a policy conversation or a science research conversation, whether or not it's kind of both a little bit, right? Because it has ramifications.
Well, it might be an area where, sorry for jumping ahead, if it's all right. It might be an area where, to your suggestion earlier, Kelly, once you do have or you get a proposal that has a methodology outlined that would to potentially look into this area, it might be a useful one to bounce back to this group to see if does that seem to make sense? Do you think that answers or could lead to the answer we're looking for here?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think that your answer is pretty clear what was meant by what you wrote, which is that the inventory and the assessment indicates a problem that has been fixed. It was assumed to have been a problem in the first place. It seems like what your answer was. And that's something that we could consider just that's what it means right now in the report. But later, if the question comes up again, we can talk a little bit more about what, in terms of moving through the assessment and the FRIA. What information is actually being collected, we could go back to this point. But for now, I think in the report, and clarify what you mean by it, we could just accept that as its meaning.
And we also talked about, like, we do landowner surveys, for example, for those situations too. What did they fix? Why?
I'll ask you the same question, and then we're gonna take a break, which is, sort of, again, in the pre-survey, the votes are split 50-50 for this year. Is there anything that you really want to make sure that we know about how they're different, or opportunities, costs of one versus another, or just anything that wish someone had asked you about.
Well, the costs were a real challenge, right? It's a big operation. And so we tried to base it on what we saw in the Washington study, but that was quite some years ago. And then there's a whole piece, was it Casey maybe brought something up about effectiveness monitoring and how does this tie in with that? And are there additional variables you'd want to collect potentially if you're going down the road to effectiveness monitoring, or is it just connectivity? I mean, that's what's in the rule, right? So,
Yeah, and to add to that, I mean, I think that ultimately there's gonna need to be an RFP for an effectiveness monitoring, like essentially proposals for effectiveness monitoring, because nobody here is going to be doing them, I don't think. Okay. So we could probably get to that too.
So were you just saying that there could be some savings potentially if this was worded in a way that might bring in pieces that were later necessary for effectiveness?
Yeah, well, especially with question 3, right, that setting us up well for finding out if the rules are effective at achieving that disconnect.
Great. Well, thank you
Yeah,
both.
thank you very much.
Let's come back at 1:45 and then we'll dive into necessary to work through the job list. We both can say that would be the same. That's what we need to go. Yeah. All right, let's take a break, come back in 10.
This, you mean in the room? Yeah, it's means like we've got a couple of every question, so. Very much, we appreciate them and, you know, I did about how we put it in forward.
I have a feeling.
You know, think questionnaire, we left the words. It's from the entire version, it's non-low and it's. I didn't find it out.
Right, like big impact for upstream, part of it is to. That's where.
Did you like? I say, you know, like.
Accused us, right? Yeah.
Regulations like.
almost all here. Maybe can you unmute us again and then I'll,
Oh, we're on mute.
Yep. Terry, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you folks hear me?
Yes. So I think you're gonna take 10 or so minutes, Terry, and kind of walk us through the research agenda and kind of what's next. And then
Yes. Yes. And Martha, if you could pull up the PowerPoint, because there's some information there that would be helpful to use. Okay. If you could go to the previous slide, that would be helpful. Perfect. Thank you. So this is what's in rule in terms of the research agenda. It needs to include these 4 elements: prioritized research projects, key milestones for each research project, a timeline for progress on the research projects, and a comprehensive IRST budget, including annual budget for each year of each project. So that's what's in rule. And I think just to sort of springboard off of some of the previous conversation, something that's not in here is the details of the particular methods to do this stuff. And statute's very clear that that's up to the IRST. And the challenge is that at the end of the day, right now you're picking one of these options for a scoping proposal from the IRST that has some methods in it. So obviously you're playing a role in picking some of the methods, but it, the statute is very clear that the IRST is the one that picks the methods, and that's why the word independent is in their. So there's some nuance there, and I can see the tension between, well, we need them to do the research, and we want to have a say in how it's done, and that's just naming that. Next slide. So in terms of this report that's due to the board by July 15th, I think it's helpful to think of this. A good way to frame this is as an executive summary style. So not a big 30-page report that's overly detailed, but something kind of the way the AMPC has requested, that the focus is on the executive summary from the IRST. And I think generally the headings will follow the 4 elements outlined in rule, plus some introduction, background information, a conclusion, and next steps to it. I think it would be helpful for the board as they're, it'd be helpful for the board as they read your report, that they understand some of how you folks arrived at your decisions. So providing some of that insight will be helpful. And then also, I think it's good to include in the research agenda that there's likely to be some coming back to the board to revisit the research agenda. And this may not be appropriate every biennium, but particularly for this first one where everything's getting up and running, and there's this example of the amphibians scoping proposal that is coming, quote unquote, soon. Is that 6 months? Is that 10 months? In part, it depends on a number of factors. But to place that as a placeholder in here, and even the effectiveness monitoring question, I think as Kelly, I believe it was Kelly who said earlier that question 3, the effectiveness question of the roads, was not included in the scoping proposal. And correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, Kelly, Jessica, but that was because there are not the BGO, the biological goals and objectives, the associated metrics, the associated targets and thresholds have not been set. So that's part of the challenge of addressing effectiveness monitoring at this stage. And I'm not exactly clear on when those will be set, but it's possible, that those could be included in the research agenda yet this biennium, but that remains to be seen. And a detail I don't have included here is that, this is going to be a report to the board that, will have a narrative to it. And I think part of the question is just exactly how that narrative gets completed and is ready to be approved on July 7th. I mean, that's something certainly I could do a draft and either a work group or the whole group reviews it. The work group could write it. There's a bunch of different options there for you folks to consider as you do that. And then getting to this question of how this fits into board materials. So this research agenda report needs to go to the board by July 15th. That's set in rule. And then the whole budget for the adaptive management program, including the research agendas budget, goes to the board in September for approval. So we will be getting those board materials to the board. I think that it's approximately mid-August when that will go to them. So this will be included in those board materials as well. But we do need to send the research agenda report by July 15th. And then the next steps after the research agenda is approved by the board is for the IRST to develop RFPs based on the research agenda, and also for the IRST to develop annual work plans based on that. So there does need to be some specificity for them to implement RFPs. So that's the basics of the framework of the research agenda. Questions, comments?
Seeing any comments or questions in the room? Terry, you raise a good question about sort of the logistics of how to craft this research agenda. I think at our July 7th meeting, we're going to want to have reviewed a draft of this document.
Yep.
This will be the first time that the board is seeing this. So I think we should maybe give some thought to how presented to the board. But it may also, trying to synthesize these ideas concisely, I think, is a benefit as well. So we're not kind of overwhelming the board. So that fine balance. We've used work groups pretty effectively in the past to do a draft of something like this. I guess that's sort of where I would lean a little bit towards. I'm curious if folks have thoughts on process. The timeline is tight. A work group gives a little more ability for a small group to work with Terry and kind of help refine it. But it could also work that Terry, if you get enough from this meeting today, Terry, to develop a draft and send that back out to us. So folks have strong opinions one way or the other using a work group or just having the chance to respond to a draft.
Maybe we should just leave.
We can decide at the end.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
I think it's reasonable that we need to.
Sounds good. Anything else on sort of the? No,
Getting attention. I don't have a big point, however. It was just that the statute says a multi-year research agenda, and then the outline for the research agenda sounds up here a little more like our biennium or something in terms of adding it. So maybe we should have, again, it shouldn't be a long report, but mention that we're doing, the first 3 questions that were mandated by the report. And then we'll be moving into effectiveness monitoring and going into amphibians. So just giving a very high level of what we might be doing not just in the first year or two. That was all, sorry, butter.
Got it. That makes sense. Yep.
Willie, you've got your hand up.
So the research agenda calls for us doing a comprehensive budget, and we're seeing the estimates in the pieces we have so far. But my question is even though it's not asked of us, where is the ODF's full budget? Where are they at with an actual approved budget? And are we going to be asking for money that's not there?
That's a great question, Will. So the budget from the board from the legislature has not been approved. We hope to have that sine die the last day of the legislature. I forget the exact date, but it's approximately June 27th, 28th in there. So that's the absolute latest we would get it. Hopefully we'll have it a week or two before then. We've seen some drafts, but those are, subject to revision. And so that's part of the challenge for you folks at this stage of the game, having a conversation is, well, how much money do you have to direct toward these various projects? And we'll get into that in the next part of the slideshow. But we will certainly, once ODF gets the allocation, we will work through it and get you folks a number so that you know as soon as possible before the July 7th meeting how much you have to work with. But I apologize, that could be as short as 8 days before July 7th. Hopefully it's 2 or 3 weeks.
And is that budget number going to be a range, or is it going to be a set do not exceed? I mean, I'm used to my own budgets. I'm not used to trying to divide up some of ODF's money.
Right. So the ODF is going to be saying, there's several items, buckets, if you will, for the adaptive management program budget. One is participation grants. One is the funding for IRST, INR's support of the IRST. One is administrative, which is very, very small, but that's things like lunches and field trips and whatnot. And then the final one is the research projects themselves. So that ODF is going to work to figure out how much goes in each of those 4 buckets, and the research projects number will go to the AMPC to decide how, to make a recommendation to put it in the research agenda for how that gets divided up. Does that make sense the way I described it? Good.
And I think we had, Harry, you were trying to provide us with an estimate, which we did include in that pre-survey document.
Exactly.
So either there will be some funding because there's unexpended money. So there could be as low as 1.5 million, assuming there's no new money that comes in the next biennium. Or that could range, I think we said 4.5 million. So that's sort of the pot that we have available. And I think there's a few ways we might want to think about crafting our list. But at least sort of knowing the minimum that we're working with, I think is helpful. Although we could all appreciate a clear number, but just timing wise, that's not really what we've got right now. So to the extent that's helpful, I don't know, Seth or anyone.
I think that's all we can do.
Yeah.
And so I mean, to the extent that it's our job to try to put those numbers behind it, I think that what this group can do is prioritize the topics and try to, and get some sense of what that's gonna cost. And then we'll figure out once the end of the year or the end of this legislative session happens, we'll have solid numbers by the time we go into the next phase. So I do think, for what it's worth, I mean, I don't know, it's no surprise. I don't think it's a huge surprise. I think there's probably more likelihood at the 4.5 than there is at the 1 or 1.5 at this point. So
I love how you dropped it almost like it was bad news, but so if you weren't listening closely, it would sound bad, but.
well,
I love just like how much y'all work that.
No.
You're not even represented.
I'm just saying, for everybody's
Yeah.
collective information, I don't think we're necessarily gonna be squeezed for this cycle. So we can, but at the same time, we still want to be judicious in how we use funds.
And just, oh yeah, and just to be, as a reminder too, that the amount of, that we may or may not have in that range is also part of a multi-year
Right.
research project. So a biannual budget reflects just a slice of that.
Yeah, in my head, I was trying to go through the numbers in these proposals and separate them out yet by year, but I know how research works, and it's not always the same amount of money year over year. So there's gonna have to be some accounting for a little bit of flexibility here.
Sorry, just one more thing I saw is that to the question of like how, what do we have and how much, what do we have in terms of in the bank or is coming, and then how much is each of the different ranges. It is also important to just consider that we need to be demonstrating that we're actually doing the work that the PFA charged us all with doing, regardless of what the budget writers say we get. We need to be doing it in order to demonstrate that we should be funded.
Yeah, similar point to Casey. I think just that, to the best that we can articulate our priorities and what we think is most important and use the budget as a filter, but not, being clear what we think the research should be and the questions that should be asked is really our charge. So there's a lot of uncertainty with the actual budget numbers that we're just not gonna be able to resolve right now. Anything else on the research agenda, Terry? Or I think I'm gonna move us on to the next section here.
Nope.
And I guess just a little bit of, I made a few slides, as you probably know by now I like to do, just to sort of help turn things around a little bit and think a little differently about some of these options. And thank you all for doing the pre-survey. We kind of put that together before we had gotten the roads scoping proposal. So it wasn't a nice fit entirely, but thank you for working through that. So this is just kind of, again, the Eastern Oregon steep slopes. If you can just move through these. The next slide. And just kind of a visual representation, super high level of relatively some of these options are a little bit more similar. We kind of talked about them in time and cost, and some are a little bit different, kind of another way to look at those. Next slide. And same for the roads. Up to the next one. Those two are, they're pretty wide ranges. And we talked about how they are similar and different, but sort of big picture, they're a little bit closer than the others. Jump to the next one. Just kind of another way to look at this, with all of them together. The next one will be where so sorry, one more. Apologies, this is smaller and harder to read than I was hoping, but this sort of lays out both for, you go back. This slide. All the options for the Eastern Oregon steep slopes, kind of pulling from that first executive summary table with timeline and costs. and also pulling out your responses to that pre-survey work we talked about a little bit before, kind of split votes for that top priority between the full systematic map and the rapid systematic map. And then for the roads options, split 50-50 between option 1 and option 2. And we didn't really take your temperature on the pre-survey since we didn't really know about that until after wanting to get more information as well. Up to the next slide. So sorry, actually, if you can go back one, that'd be great.
Just a quick question, maybe since we've got that virus folks in the room. For the roads, for the hydrologic connectivity, it's my understanding that cost estimate in time is just for that initial baseline, right? So that doesn't include the trend analysis. Just, I'm thinking too about that comprehensive budget piece for the research agenda, and we need to decide if we're voting just on that baseline or if there's the committing resources to trend analysis or not, because that would be like out year. We're dedicating funding for that, doing things the same way. And I don't know if that is anticipated to be part of the RFP or not.
Well, we kind of, I think in the document you all have,
Sorry to like go back.
no, but we suggest you go back at year 5, right, about 5 years. And that it would be less money, but how much less? I don't know that, but we got super specific on that.
Yeah.
It was like 25% less for each of the.
But we wouldn't be doing, that wouldn't be a part of the RFP, the trend analysis at this.
I don't think I would recommend
Doing that.
Just because it's so far out.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know how research works if you are doing trend analysis, if that, you know that's gonna be longer time frame that you could. Money for that, future work, I just don't really know. I just wanted to be clear on that.
We will have funding for it.
Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of part of the package, so.
well, we have funding now, we've got
Yeah.
funding coming in this biennium, so just at some point with that research agenda, I would imagine that in the budget and the timeline, there will be some column that says like expended money, dedicated money, like we'll have to track that, and those columns might have zeros in them today, but they feature, but
But I
I
think
think to your point, I think it's really important for the board to know that this is the initial, like establishing.
because we're like
And
working
then
on
we don't want it to be, and we will be yeah.
Yeah, we're working on bienniums, researching each biennium, but that's a 36-month and a 48-month timeframe. Those extend beyond that biennium, even just for the baseline, let alone.
the trend. Well, I think by us, I mean, it's a good point. But we did prioritize that in our question.
Mhm.
So clearly the committee does feel like that is something that needs to be done ongoing.
Yeah.
I do understand what you're saying, Jessica, as far as, holding a contract with a single entity to come back every 4 years might not be the best use of, and who knows whether that company's still in business in 8 years, and so it probably is better, especially, and given the fact we are working on a biennial budget. But knowing that that is a commitment that we need to honor every, I mean, at some point, those who replace us could say, okay, we have enough information, we're good. And maybe we skip it and go forward 8 years or something. That's for other people to decide, but I think there is, member from this group, obviously we prioritize the question, so.
Yeah. I just
we
want to
need
make sure.
Keep that in mind.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for giving me the space to continue
Yeah,
to.
we're all, thinking about how to facilitate this conversation, right? We're kind of all going through this for the first time. We don't have a final state budget number. There's a lot of things that are unknown, but I think trying to clarify where we as a group really think money would be best spent to answer the questions that we have is, even if it's not a perfect match for where we are in 3 weeks. I think that's where I would like us to try to focus. Oh, sorry. Who's got-
Just to add a little bit there, yes, we're working with a biennial budget, and in this example, option 1 is 36 months, which obviously extends past the biennium, and the INR has the ability to carry the money across biennia, and so money put towards that 3-year project now can still be spent over the 3 years. That makes sense.
Yeah, just a quick question, Chair. So pre-survey on that table does not mean pre-survey that's in the,
Oh, no, our pre-survey.
sorry. So that was a survey,
That's what we
or that was a
call it.
pre-survey that we did.
Or
not
maybe
survey.
I just had that word in my head. I'm
Okay,
not sure.
cool. So, but we don't have the, okay, because I was like, I don't remember voting or indicating my preference on the pre-surveys. So, thanks.
Oh, yes, not
Pre-survey
specific to
1
the
and
rest.
pre-survey
It
2.
was just our way to try to take the
Yeah.
temperature so
Sorry.
that in the hopes that we can streamline the conversation, which is kind of where I want to go next, which is really just kind of doing, my thought was to sort of take one at a time, since there is sort of a 50-50 split. And I think I would like us to be able to really dig into if people feel strongly about one versus the other, and what are sort of the pros and cons of the 2 options, and then just try to see if, where the conversation goes, since it helps shrink down the options a little bit. So I was going to start with steep slopes and then move us to roads and kind of see where we land. So let's plan for 3 o'clock. We're going to check in and see where we are. Because again, we really need to get a draft list together that will set us up well. So that's why I'll be pushing us a little bit more than normal. So if you can actually just flip through the next slide.
So just before maybe this does it, before we jump into that discussion, there was a 50-50 split on first choices, but if you look at first and second choice, there was a more, delineation between the 2.
Yeah, actually that slide you were just on shows that a little bit better. Yeah.
Also, there's, not everyone voted, right? There are only 8 votes and there are 10 people on the committee.
Yes, that's true. It's
Right? Like, it seems to get somewhat inconclusive to me, and we can find, maybe
Yes,
do a
and
temperature
that's-
taking in the room,
Yeah,
get the,
I think
everyone's
that's good.
votes.
Yeah,
Really?
just to be super clear, I don't know who voted for what. This is not like we have to go this way. I'm just trying to reflect areas of what I'm hearing as alignment to try to streamline the conversation a little bit. If that's not the case, if folks feel really strongly one way or the other, then we can definitely dig into that. Like,
Now, my comment was about being like, it would sort of be interesting to know about those other 2 votes. Like, if they-
yeah.
Also, we've heard lots of feedback. About
yeah, true.
So I guess,
Do you want to do a temperature check?
yes, I had a question. Sorry, I'm just trying to find it in the notes.
And Josh is. Lean forward.
Yeah,
touch
so-
this thing.
Well, again, trying to keep us very focused today, which is really just to ask if anyone feels strongly that we need to discuss the descriptive review or the no further research option. Seeing a lot of heads, no. So then I think for the purposes of that, we'll take those off the table and just really be looking at those first 2 options. And then my second question was, does anyone feel that they can only support one of those? Okay. Great. So there's some space for conversation. Always good with this group. And then I'm just curious, for someone who ranked the full systematic map, can you just speak to why that is your first choice and not the rapid? Anyone felt strongly that the full systematic map was the way to go for this one?
I'll comment. And you know, I'm sort of in that position that we left the conversation where there are pieces that I like of both. The piece that I like the most about the full systematic is the detailed nature of the, you know, kind of, I think Sean was describing it, like this is exactly where we found it, and this is, you know, who it was written by, and this is why or why not it was approved, you know, denied or approved for publication. And then I do really like that there's more than one reviewer. And those are the pieces that I particularly like. I could go without the workshops. I could go without, you know, maybe limiting more the experts consulted. You know, I'm not sure how I feel at this moment about some of the empirical data stuff that we talked about. I'm still kind of chewing on that piece, but I mean, for those reasons, on the kind of the detailed nature, the specificity, the understanding more, that's why I chose the full systematic.
And I'll be honest, I think I put that as my number one too, but I don't know why I did. I think I would support the second one more. So.
Just advance one slide, sorry, I have the comparison of the two, yeah. Anyone else who feels strongly in this moment that the full systematic map?
I think
David. Oh, sorry.
There's
That's
David. Dave.
I also supported the first choice there, the full systematic base. I don't want to reiterate, but basically just to affirm or echo what Amanda said. And also in the scheme of things, it seems to me, considering this is a fairly major important study, and given the relative cost difference between the first two options there, the full versus rapid, and that this is covering over half the state, it seemed like a fairly minor cost in the scheme of things. So those are the reasons why I supported the first one.
Yeah, so I can positively identify one of the slackers who did not do the pre-meeting survey.
You're right, yeah, I can say that.
But I would have disagreed with myself if I'd done it, because I would have said the rapid systematic map, and now after having the chance to do the Q&A, I'm actually pretty strongly in favor of the full systematic map for the reasons that Amanda articulated, and also because I do like having the data compiled and posted. I think having that openness is pretty important. And then, like David pointed out, looking at the difference between this is basically another 50,000, and then comparing that to the next item, which is the still the roads, the road survey. That's so like cheap to get, you know, multiple reviewers, which I really like. It's eliminating bias and getting the, you know, the wisdom that comes with teamwork, and then the data being posted. So I think I probably would have said the rapid before, but having gotten more information, I would favor pretty strongly the full systematic map.
Going to the strong feelings about rapid.
Yes, please.
I'm moving this on. Barely. Thank you. It was helpful to hear from both of you. What I heard from you was, you know, necessarily from a scientific perspective, really need the full systematic map. And I actually voted in the survey for the rapid, because I felt like it was a reasonable thing to find out more. But taking a cue from Josh has told us and told me separately stories from going to Idaho and learning about equipment limitation zones. And I'm realizing that we have a lot, especially for the eastern side of the state. We have a lot that we can learn from other places, and digging a little bit deeper seems really valuable for that.
Anyone else who feels in this moment or when you did the pre-survey that the rapid systematic map makes the most sense.
I just want to say, I voted all for the rapid systematic map and hearing the discussion. I think that you said that the drivers of mass wasting processes will also be covered by that. I thought, okay, we get comparable information in many ways for less money. On the other hand, I think I hear what everyone's saying about full systematic map, and I'm good with that.
I support the rapid systematic because I'm in having, in the conversations I've had, I just, and hearing it echoed here, I just don't see, I do see Josh's point and the value of having some of that data. I'm not sure how much that data will actually have, but there will be some data there. I just don't know that that's worth the time. I mean, to me, it's honestly more about the time than the expense. I mean, you're looking at 48 months versus 12 to 18 months. And I know those are guesses, but that's a big period of time. Honestly, any additional expense, I just don't see a huge value in it when there's not as much there.
And you've got more experience doing this more recently than anybody else in this room.
Well, yeah, I don't know, do you mind if I'm not a voting member, but can I still chime in?
Please, yeah.
I agree with Steph. I think the amount of time for this, given the, I think number of publications that you initially found, I think the full systematic map is a little over-engineered for what's needed here, and I think the rapid systematic will get you most of the way there, and like the full systematic map, it's just very minimal marginal gains for that additional 50K. Plus the amount of time, like Seth mentioned, I think the rapid systematic map's the way to go here.
Anyone online?
So I'm at a loss because I don't have the experience here to really contribute one way or the other. My first reading was rapid. Listening to the argument a few minutes ago, I then would say, okay, I'll go full systematic. But now listening to the last couple comments, I'm back to saying rapid was the right way to go. But it's based upon ignorance, okay? And so I don't want to vote from ignorance. I'll just continue to put myself on mute. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Julie,
I also voted rapid, and what Seth said and what Will said. So my motivation's where I am now. And that was huge. Yes.
It's like, thank you for speaking up, because I need you. You don't have to be a voting member. I don't think that you know it's something, yes, tell us. So thank you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, I think that we're in a place where we could, I mean, I'm happy to do the rapid. I think that we'd get what we need as well. But would people be okay with adding at least one other reviewer in for that one, just to get, you know, more diversity of thought in that space? I mean, I would really like that, just to have it a little bit less bias. So don't go to the effort of having groups or pulling in other experts or all of that kind of business, but within the IRST have one reviewer.
Two other thoughts. One is like, I think in terms of the bias, I think that, you know, part of it's like there's decisions that need to be made quickly in the rapid, when it has to go in the rapid. And I trust the IRST to make sound decisions around that. And the other way I'm thinking about it is that additional information that is available from the full systematic review. Would I take the time to review that in addition to reviewing the review? Probably not, to be honest. It might be helpful for some, but anyway, just more stuff supporting the rapid systematic review.
I'm hearing a lot of sort of that people could probably be okay with either one. There's some good arguments for both. I'm hearing from Amanda, interest in sort of a modified rapid systematic, rapid systematic map with an additional reviewer. Concerns around, are there other ways that people would modify the rapid systematic map that would address needs that you have from the full systematic map, I guess maybe it's better question.
They're compiling and making available existing empirical databases. I'm fine with rapid, but I would like to see the data.
Can you do that in a rapid, Jessica, Kelly?
I don't see why you couldn't. I mean, if you come across the data sets, you could certainly make them available.
It feels like a good habit that we should maybe get to build.
Adam, can I ask a question? When you all did the review, did you have multiple people reviewing each publication, or did you divvy them up and just?
I know we did initial call for folks, experts to send us papers. I can't recall if we did had like different folks then look at different papers. I mean, after we reviewed it.
Well, no, just like with internally in your process, for each paper, as Amanda's suggesting, did you have multiple reviewers for each paper?
Not that I recall. Yeah.
Is this for the post disturbance funds?
Yeah, you were involved.
Yeah. I mean, everybody that was involved in that has read the papers, so I don't.
That's right.
Yeah, we all did go over the papers, but we were each responsible for writing a different section with a different focus. I don't know if that answers the question. Internal or sections internally.
Yeah. And I mean, there's definitely value to having more than one reviewer look at a paper because, he brings their own bias to it. So, I would. Nobody asked me, but I certainly think there's value to that. So.
I support that.
Emily, could you, or whoever, sorry, is running the screen, could you pull up the Word doc version you had?
Oh, I can do that one since I have it on mine, because I can take the notes. So just
because I think I'm hearing maybe we're moving towards a modified option, which I'm also wondering if that is possible in our process. Or would that need to go back to IRST, or I mean, how would that?
Let me answer Stacy's question and then note that Dave Bugney has his hands up as well. But in terms of what the rule says about modifying a scoping proposal, the rules are silent on it. But when it talks about developing the research agenda and prioritizing research projects, it says, AMC shall consider A, B, C, D, E, F, and IRST scoping proposals are one of the considerations. So I think on the one hand, I think it's perfectly within scope to modify those scoping proposals. That just naming the challenge of, well, how does that affect the timing and the cost? That's a little bit harder. If for something like just adding a second reviewer, that's not a major methodological change. It's obviously going to affect the cost, but so I'm not exactly sure how best to address that cost question in terms of modifying the proposal that would turn into an RFP.
I think the description said 1 to 2 reviewers too.
Oh, okay.
Did you make that a tiny bit bigger, Emily? Sorry.
Yeah.
Can't see that.
Yeah.
So we maybe modify to say 2 or more.
Well, it says, under the scoping proposal for that rapid, it says, number 3 is relying on only one reviewer rather than 2 or more independent reviewers. Does specify one for the rapid.
Okay, maybe just 2.
Are you saying for the full?
No, I thought it said 2. I thought it says.
It might not say the same thing in the table as it says in that list of 6 bullets.
Right.
Yeah.
Wendy?
So I was thinking that procedurally, if what we want to do is take the second option, the rapid one, rapid systemic, and add another reviewer and add the data that you suggested. But we could just say we want to do that and move this to that and just ask the IRST to do a very short, just like 1 paragraph amended to the prior scoping and just say we, add the option of adding 1 reviewer and collecting the data, and we estimate that the price is increasing that. That way we'd be consistent with our procedures and paper it over, but we could decide today to go ahead with that option and afterwards just to add that little papering of the scope that you did.
Yes.
David
Wendy,
Bugney has his hands up, just FYI, it's been up for a while.
So I just wanted to briefly say that my largest hang-up with the Rapid was the lack of more than 1 reviewer. But if we do modify it like this, I think that's fine. The thing is, it seems to me at the end of the day, we want to be comfortable that whatever work product comes back, whatever it is, that we can hang our hat on it and feel good about it. And I think if we have more than 1 reviewer, that reduces that chance of a bias one way or the other. So if we can do that, I'm cool with that.
You for capturing those notes, Emily. So I think on the table is rapid systematic map with some relatively minor modifications, including requiring 2 reviewers and making available existing or empirical databases publicly accessible. So I see a show of hands again are like 0, no way, 5, yes, on board. How are folks feeling about moving forward with that? Seeing a lot of 5s in the room. Online. Yeah.
Thumbs up.
Thanks,
What is your range?
So I feel like this is a good place to pause on this one. So I'm hearing some good alignment around this approach. And that sounds good, everyone. Shifting to the roads. Again, none of this is final. We're not voting on this today. You'll have more time to think about it. So if we can shift, go back to the slides. Which similarly, there's our nice split for folks who attend pre-work. And if you can go to the next slide, sort of the summary from the executive summary of the 2. And I guess I would just start with the same question for the steep slopes, which is, does anyone feel that they could only support one of these?
I guess I could support either, but I'd feel more comfortable if the sentiment modeling was broadened to not be necessarily a quantity of sediment.
And I'm curious if you can speak to which option is your preference and why.
Yeah, my preference would be option 1. And a part of that is also something we didn't necessarily discuss, which is get back to it in the under the cost. Obviously, that cost is pretty largely different. And I think you guys had a question to us in here. IRST did.
propose that it's marginally, but
Yeah, well, it said, if AFAMPC desires to detect changes at the sub-state level, east, west, large, small landowners with a similar amount of statistical power, that's where it would increase that as far as sample size and go to that higher end of the 4.4. So, I'm thinking about that and thinking about, the relative, usability of what we talked about, the sediment model. And I would rather see the higher end of kind of just the hydrologic connectivity and get that sub-state level statistical power in there, and focus more on that.
Anyone else feel strongly about option one? That should be focused.
Can I ask a question? You know, well, and since the two of you are in the room and I know your background is heavier in this area. How did Dubay at all? I know we're supposed to be focusing on, and sort of modeling this effort and somewhat after theirs. They deal with the whole sediment side of it. Did they model?
Yeah, they use the Warsaw model.
And was it, and just was it useful?
Kathy didn't really seem to think so, no. And she's one of the ones that said that there was a lot of variability in the estimates.
So it doesn't really help us.
Maybe I can speak to that too, because I've done some great light modeling. The other model that was mentioned for assisting for systems. And it's that's kind of inferring the stream network based on, you saw this number of cells creates an initiation of a tributary basically. And so then you're kind of looking at how does that fit with the rainfall? And okay, I'm gonna put out, like a really high density NHD layer and see how my inferred stream layer would get with that. And then I would find there was one particular case where it wanted to jump over the ridge for some reason. And so then I'm like doing like fixes to get it to like, no, this stream goes here. It's a major tributary, it does not jump the ridge. And so it was really useful for looking at, well, what happens if I change surfacing? Or, what happens if I change like cross drain frequency? And it was good for that. And it was good for helping the water system target where they would want to really pay attention on their road network. But I wouldn't have, just the sensitivity to what causes a stream to initiate and inferring the stream network that way. It was good for like information gathering and decision support. But I don't think I would have said, oh, this is how much sediment you're getting off the roads, and really tried to like, hang my hat on that and make a big deal. Specific sediment amounts. So there's limitations to it. They definitely have uses, and I think as a decision support approach, they're very useful that way. But for saying, oh, this is how much sediment's getting into the system, I don't think you can do that with Great Plains based on my experience and having talked with the people at the Forest Service, scientists at the Forest Service who are behind it. That's pretty much what they told me for them. So I think
I would just add to that, again, if you want to compare time zero with, first time step and look at relative amounts of potential decrease, it could be useful for that. It could be useful for starting to get at effectiveness monitoring. And then I think also, and this isn't one of your objectives, but if you wanted to use it to prioritize where you targeted your road restoration dollars, then it could be really helpful with that, because you would get something more than it's connected or it isn't, but it's connected and it's a bad actor. But that's not, really how you all had initially couched it. So I don't know if that comes into your thinking.
Unfortunately, that That's a good question, but that is more about implementation and less about,
Yeah.
you know. Yeah.
And that really is, in my opinion, its greatest contribution would be from that perspective, so.
It's inevitable that with you two here, we can ask questions that are generated by the conversation. So I guess one of them is, it sounded to me in scoping as though what was the option 2 with the sediment modeling included the gathering of more data. Listening to conversations about modeling sediment delivery and makes it sound like maybe the modeling would be an exercise in utility or frustration. Going back to your conversations with USGS, what I wonder is whether there's a value in including those additional sampling as part of non-model. Because if they have value for sediment delivery, they must have value to our understanding of the connection or disconnection.
Let's try to follow you, Casey.
Oh, so there's in option 2, right? There's additional data that would be collected. It says if additional road characteristics are connected or are collected, for example, cut slope vegetation, road surface type, then connectivity can be reported by these categories. It makes it sound like that's part of the modeling, that there's additional data that would be collected with option 2 than with option 1. And my thought is, why are we not collecting that data
In option 1.
in option 1?
I had a similar.
Okay.
Because in that.
Sorry, it took me a while to get there.
No, I had that thought too, because that point stood out to me. So it's like, would we want to do option 1, but collect that data that could be needed later for modeling? So if that was something we wanted to do, as for example, a decisions, can you connect the segment? And if not, surfacing gonna do it, drainage gonna do it. Could be useful in that way. I don't know how much cost and time that data collection adds if there's already crews doing data collection for the option 1 stuff. To just and also collect this. Takes more time, but not nearly as much time as getting out there in the first place. Yeah.
So hearing a possible maybe modified option 1, but before we go there, I just wanted to pause and see if anyone felt like option 2, which was the hydrology as well as the sediment, made sense or was their top choice. I think we've learned a lot from Jessica and Kelly being here, so all kind of processing that, and that was one I had chosen for my first choice, but I think in hearing the conversation, and I similarly had a thought around sort of a modified option 1 that maybe could address some of those concerns. So I guess I'm not hearing anyone speaking super loudly for option 2. Looking online in case I'm missing anyone. How do folks feel about kind of focusing on option 1 with some modifications as proposed by PC or I think that would look like option 1 with
There's a list of additional metrics that will be included in option 2 on page 19. It's like 5 bullet points. I think the last one is really the expected outcome of the modeling. Would you agree? The expected sediment delivery.
Page 20 has the knowledge contribution. It's the same as for survey option 1, except option 2, it has like 6 bullets. And the third one includes additional road characteristics for sediment, cut slope vegetation, road surface type, traffic that will be reported by the. It sounds like that is really the data that's needed to do modeling. And if that would make it so the data set could be useful if someone came along later and wanted to do modeling work, or if a company decided they wanted to do the modeling work to figure out how to deal with ultimately figure out how to deal with problem road segments or something like that.
So how would we capture that here? Just,
I think if you can just copy that list just as a start, that's in the scoping proposal on page 19.
okay,
I have not personally done this modeling, so I don't know if that is the full list of characteristics that would need to be collected. And if it's much more extensive than that, because I know that there are, you need to do the sediment modeling, you need to get at the slope of the road and characterize the segments in a particular way. And I don't know how much of that, if really what you're after is we want to collect all the data, we just may not want to use it to model, then then that's different than that just list of characteristics there, which I think do the modeling goes way beyond that.
I don't know how technical could. This is what I guess I'll do. Missing some of the data. I don't know, you might just consider that, you might just consider like, what are the questions you're answering? Because they're not gonna focus on some of these small details.
Yeah, I just keep coming back to like who the forest practice rules and statutes are for. And there can be a lot of recreationist damage on roads as well. So like in here, it talks about traffic levels, but traffic levels of who. And so, I mean, you could get pretty granular. I mean, there's a lot of information that you can collect at any one site. That's why I would prefer, real situational data over modeled data any day when it comes to forest practices stuff, because there's just so much site specificity out there. That's why we need very flexible rule sets in order to address those things. So, yeah, I mean, I'd be really curious what that full suite of additional variables would be, because I think that there's a lot of things that could tell a pretty interesting story, but then it's to what end?
So absent any sort of, any modeling or characterization of the sediment, I'm just, can we actually duplicate the Dubay et al. Effort without that? Or are we fundamentally changing the analysis by not including it?
Well, it's different than what you did, even what we proposed is different. And we read, our interpretation was kind of like, use Dubay.
Yeah, it is.
Not
It is.
follow Dubay, right? So it would, but also Dubay never replicated either. They really haven't given examples. They just established baseline.
They did use sediment numbers. They also had some prior sediment analysis that they could kind of use as a target, right? I think they call them targets, which we don't in Oregon.
I think that, the main difference that I would think about is what your trends are going to be based on. And so under just the hydrological connectivity, trend data is going to be miles per road, right? Miles per connected stream per mountain road.
Maximum extent.
Yeah, right.
Everybody's still fine.
Yes.
I don't know if we want to go down this road, but someone said it earlier on that instead of defining some monitoring metrics here, we could ask for proposal vendors or IDMKC within the RFP for them to propose, and maybe we want to shape that a little bit more. But I'm just curious if there's some flexibility there, like this group may not be best positioned to know exactly what should be monitored or collected. And how do you create a budget for that? I'm not sure, but
I've gotten a little lost, I think, right now. Because like if we're talking, I think about, using option one and maybe modifying it. And so it's been an interesting conversation. I'm just sort of curious. I could not now say, oh, this is what we planned it, with someone else. But I'm just curious, like kind of where we are right now.
I think what I was hearing was that option one, it's on the front of me right now, just the focus on hydrologic connectivity. But instead of doing the additional sediment modeling that is outlined in option two,
Yeah.
in option one, it would be focused on that hydrologic connectivity. And in that proposal would include data collection related to sediment.
Okay.
So instead of doing, please someone correct me if I'm not tracking this, but instead of doing the additional sediment modeling work, which I think we've had good conversation around, that it may not quite give us what we're looking for. There's questions about the time and cost, given what we might learn from it. But there's still interest in, I think, aligning with the direction of the report and responding to sort of the do-they approach, which does include sediment.
Okay. And then in terms of the IRSD members who are here, does that sound like a feasible thing for you to feel like we could, like, that's something you could do? What's not clear to me is like, what, in terms of the additional cost and modeling, like, and data, whether or not this would be a major modification to the scope and proposal that seems, you know, like you'd have to go back to the IRSD and redo it, or if this sounds like something that could be fairly, you know, cut and dried in terms of how to do the work and if it seems consistent with your basic approach.
Yeah, so I think what we'll understand is collect the additional data as if we were going to do sediment modeling, but not actually run the model.
I think that's what I was hearing.
Yeah,
Okay.
because we get the value of having the understanding not only of how many miles of road are disconnected, but how much sediment is coming empirically off of sections of road that are connected, and what the surface is, what the traffic is like. Right, those all seem like very important, valuable things.
You won't give the sediment unless you model it.
Let's model it.
But it's, I guess it says the following metrics will be included in addition to those in survey option one. But measuring sediment is different than modeling sediment, right? Okay.
Right. Yes.
So I guess I thought I was proposing that we would actually, this part of this proposal, this RFP, it would be include measuring the sediment delivery.
No, that is a massive undertaking. I mean, there's no way you would do that for that amount of money. Modeling would be much less expensive because all you're doing there is you're characterizing the road segments.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just asked Josh, because I'm not sure what you actually have to characterize in the field to do that.
Yeah.
But you would characterize the road segments and then you use the model to estimate how much sediment will be coming off each of those road segments versus setting up like sediment traps and all sorts of other things that you're actually, empirically estimating the amount of sediment.
So like, for example, Kelly asked me to look up the Great Light Manual. So it's got a base rate that is in the model based on, the characteristics you get from a DEM and the plot studies that have already been done using that laborious approach that she just mentioned. And then, you're going to enter the road surfacing and then like vegetation, the things that you would collect in the field. And then like some of the pre-survey option number 2 would be basically doing some pre-figuring out the road characteristics based on geographic infosystem data, and then that can be ground truthed during data collection. But I mean, what was listed in the research proposal is the additional data would cover Great Plain. I'm not familiar with Forestry, but I've never run that. So
Okay.
I can't say to speak to that.
Cool.
They're all, most of the models are pretty similar from my
In terms of
understanding.
what they need, yeah.
And it's that calibration piece that really, the data, the field data, empirical data collection that you use
Yeah.
to calibrate the model with. That, you know, if you want it calibrated, that's gonna improve your estimate.
Right.
But if you don't calibrate it, then you're gonna get, you know, just like Jessica was saying, you know, your estimates are gonna be wildly inaccurate.
Right. And I know that Seth has his
Oh,
commentary,
okay.
just as a follow-up though, and maybe this is to your observation, maybe this has been part of the effectiveness monitoring, is that it seems like sediment in places physically or by watching the video is a necessary part of that, and presumably would feed into, if we're collecting all the data for a model and then we're gathering sediment as part of effectiveness monitoring, that a model then gets a lot better, presumably, right? Yeah.
Is it just me, Dave, and Will, or has the room froze?
I
Gone
think I
silent.
don't hear any audio.
Okay. Yeah, for folks in the room, we've lost you. Hopefully you can hear us. We lost the audio in the room.
I think and the Great Plain uses a base rate that's calculated from plot studies that were done by Forest Service and others for the Great model, which was a very labor intensive way that was based on a lot of field measuring of actual sediment generation and transport on those. So they basically taken that and information and put it into the base rate for the Great Plain. So that's kind of assumed, and then it's modified based on surface vegetation. So is that data still apply with greater rainfall intensity? It's probably underestimated just on that. But that's what we've got. So it's based on empirical data that calibrated the model and then modifying with the same vegetation.
You know where that calibration data came from, the geographics.
All over Western Oregon and Washington.
Okay, but it's Western Oregon and Washington, it's not a national law.
I think I've actually got very few actual sites where they've actually done the calibration. That was the
It's
issue
hard,
that I used.
yeah.
That's what I think. Yeah. It's there.
Terry, sorry, you thought your hand up for.
Yeah, so apology, we lost the sound for a minute or two there, so apology if I missed something, but what's not clear to me is I hear people saying that the modeling effort itself doesn't appear very valuable, but you want to collect the data to do the sediment modeling. And so what's the value of those data like slope and
I
whatnot?
think I answered it, right? Or I think my question did. Maybe not. Right,
So-
is that,
This is a good clarification, but what I have been learning from this discussion is that it might be useful in a relative sense, but not in an absolute sense.
It being the data or the modeling?
The model itself is what you're saying. The model output.
The model
in a
output,
relative sense.
right, could be useful in a relative sense.
Yeah.
And
We shouldn't
Kelly, you
think too
said-
much on the absolute estimates, yeah.
It seems to me like if we're gonna collect that data, we might as well do the model. And have some relative information.
This is, I'm getting too far in the weeds, but kind of to the question that I had to Julie about that other, like, you got cameras and
Oh,
like knowing cause or like reason for sedimentation. That's my question is, here we're really discussing hydrologic connectivity. So is it reasonable to assume that that model is only producing sediment numbers specifically due to hydrologic connectivity? Or is it also collecting sediment information from collecting it along cut banks and, stuff that might come off of trucks or dust that might come off of the road as someone is traveling on it? Because none of that has to do with hydrologic connectivity.
But what I would assume, we're collecting that data so you can calibrate the model, and then so you can try to hold those variables steady in the model, and then just the variable of connectivity would be because the model would be artificially able to do that, right? Am I doing that correctly? That's the idea of the model. Model with that change, right? Just that hydrologic connectivity.
And I'm just wondering if you can get to that specificity as it relates to then rule changes.
Well, that's what I understood from your comment earlier about, and your response about the base rate and being
Yeah.
able to, that the model will generate what the base rate would be and then what would be additional from the condition of the.
That's what I'm saying. It'll try to isolate that variable and then tell you what the change is relative to that variable of just changing the hydrologic disconnection.
Mhm.
This is the relative difference
Right,
in
yeah.
sediment that you'll see. Right? I mean, that's
Right.
what I would assume.
That's what we predict it would be.
Yeah.
And the model isn't gonna be as specific as, dust off of a truck going by or anything like that. There's no way you're gonna capture that kind of detail with a model like this. So that, that would just be incorporated in background or,
I think what really jumped out to me about option 2 as its original version is just it seemed like a lot of cost effectiveness. It's a year longer. There's opportunity to fold in a whole additional element of VBOs that we may be looking at. It just seemed like if we're going to spend money going out in the field and doing modeling work, we can kind of do 2 at once. So I really liked that piece and thinking about, again, we don't have an effectiveness monitoring approach set up, but I could see some potentially good synergies with this data collection as well. So that's appealing to me about the option 2.
Yeah, me too.
It's funny how much time it takes that
I know.
for me to understand.
I appreciate all the brains and
And then you
everything.
get the folks online. Am I missing any thoughts or questions you all have?
No, thank you.
My biggest concern originally over the hydrologic connectivity with the sedimentation was the accuracy of the sedimentation model. I mean, I'm not a geomorphologist or anything, but from what little I know of it, the error bars could be pretty significant. And so I was just wondering of the cost benefit of that versus just doing the basic hydrologic connectivity model. But then on the flip side, what is it that we ultimately want to know? I mean, do we want to know just how these roads are hydraulically connected to the streams, or do we want to know not only that, but are they imparting any sediment to the? I mean, what's really important? And so, but given the error there potentially, from what I understand, I opted for the option or just the hydrologic connectivity.
I think I agree with Stacy that the bullet point on page 20 can inform the development of performance targets and the effectiveness of road rules at achieving PPIs related to hydrologic disconnection and sediment delivery. Seems like a pretty important thing that if one can do that, the other one can't. We should prioritize that one.
I don't have as clear of a sense from our conversation on where folks are on this one. So interested in doing a quick temperature check, won't hold anyone to their number.
Carrie,
Oh, okay, Terry, go ahead.
I guess another consideration is if you're only looking at cost, the relative cost between option 1 and option 2, if you're not looking at sub-statewide numbers, 1.1 versus whatever, 1.35 million or whatever it is, those are pretty close. But if you're looking at the difference in cost between, even within option 1 of doing it statewide versus these different, big versus small landowner and east versus west. So that's just another consideration to kind of, sorry to throw in that wrench to the decision making, but it's an important consideration of are you interested, how much are you interested in the extra layers of east west and big versus small landowner?
I think the only real concern I have with option 2 is, and I think it's shared by a bunch of people in the room here, is that option 2, using these models, the accuracy of the models, right? And in so much as some are looking at option 2 because it could give us a place where we could set targets. Well, that makes my concern even, because that enlarges that concern. If we're going to set targets based on a model that we already have a lot of concerns with, then I'm doubly concerned. So, but I think as long as the acknowledgement in the room is these are models that are useful for relative sort of comparisons, then I think that's great, and I'm on board. But I don't want to see us going down and then there's a bait and switch, and now we're using the same model that we had concern with 4 years ago, and we're going to set a target for you that we're not sure about. And so that's where I'm at with full transparency. Like I kind of lean both ways depending on how the conversation is going at the moment.
Just got a question for you. In Washington, how are their targets set? And talk a little bit about what those targets are.
I don't know that I can say a whole lot about it. I tried to dig into that a little bit too. And I'm not sure I have a great answer to share. Like, I don't know that it was based on a lot of empirical data, for example.
They used to reference sites, minimally disturbed watersheds.
Yeah.
Was it for sediment or was it like, how like quickly roads were disconnected or how many roads were connected? Or was it actually based on the sediment? Do you remember?
It must have been based on the sediment somehow, but yeah, I never got to that level of depth. It was just mentioned in the Dubé report.
I think it was more about percentage reductions through time, maybe what the targets were based on. That's not right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
with this sediment numbers, I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess they must have had some sort of sediment measures for reference minimally disturbed watersheds that then they could use as a comparison. But yeah,
Right.
we didn't it wasn't easily accessible to find out how those were done.
Yeah, that was a challenge. I mean, the other idea too is like for performance targets, the targets could be based on percent of road that's connected.
Yeah.
How that changes through time too. It's
Makes a lot of sense.
It's just one
right?
more simple way.
And you kind of not have that already for. Yeah, sorry. That's what free is.
Yeah. I mean, it's not free itself doesn't say you have to have this much, right? It just says you have to have all of it in 20 years.
So, yes,
Jewish
I just want to flag timing, because there's a lot, and Terry raised a really good point that we haven't really fully touched on, which is sort of the scale of this. I was trying to see if we could articulate maybe the biggest concerns of one versus the other, and I think I'm hearing that there's a lot of shared concern around sort of the accuracy of the model, of the sediment model, which is causing folks to have more preference for option one. Is there a solution there as far as if that's the concern, a way to still include a sediment?
That was what my comment was
Element?
regarding, yeah. So my question is a clarifying question about process kind of, because I presume, you said we're not making a decision today. So, and I assume at some point, we'll be writing
Not
out.
voting today.
We're not voting today, right? But I assume that we would have, written out what we are voting on.
Yes.
And that we could potentially include in that a statement about how we intend to use the sediment models, how we do not want to use them, and if that would make you feel more comfortable.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
It's a statement
Good
of
idea.
intent as much as a statement of science, right?
Yeah.
Idea. So I'm just kind of sitting here wondering about sediment modeling and somebody mentioned effectiveness monitoring, which I think I'm supposed to have some kind of role in. So,
I always say that.
so there's, hydrologic connectivity, how many sediments or what percentage or, number of miles connected, and we want that number of miles connected to go down over time. That would be one measure of effectiveness, but something that kind of inherent to it is that it's a small proportion of the roads that are causing most trouble. And the worst factors are the ones supposed to be getting done right now. And so it would be nice to, even if it's just an estimate, like a relative estimate, hey, how much sediment are we not getting into? And the modeling lets us get into that when we're doing effectiveness monitoring. It's not perfect. It's not like, I wouldn't, again, say it would be, this is the absolute amount of sediment, but like a relative change. And then there's also some utility, I think, to being able to ID which segments are problematic and maybe can't be disconnected. And then you can play with what are the other variables, like say surface area. Just pave small sections that can't do it with a cross drain. We can't, there's no way to practically disconnect it other than, moving the road or eliminating the crossing. So would surfacing do it? We can explore that with modeling, but it might also be a way to give like a relative estimate of what was the decrease, like a rough percentage of decrease based on work done as we go through like 5-year check-ins to effectiveness, set up effectiveness. I wouldn't want to say tons avoided, but X percent reduction. Estimation, and I really mean the word estimating a percent reduction could be useful as well. And if we collect, that vegetation data and that surfacing data and so on, we don't do some modeling. This step, we could come a long way in 5 years. Baseline data, 5-year data, and now someone can model both. And let's see what's the percentage decrease. And we preserve that, even if we just do option one like that. That data that could go into sediment modeling also connected, we preserve that option down the road to try to get like estimates of reductions and effectiveness. So I do like, that is just my personality in general, but I like hedging my bets. I like preserving options for the future. With a little bit of extra effort now to have more options later is that's generally of interest to me.
Question I had, sorry, to get to Terry's point around sort of the scale is whether the pre-survey options would help limit, right? Because full statewide option one, I assume is going to be a lot more expensive than an option one that's been narrowed with those pre-surveys. So I guess I don't know if we choose one or both, or if it's best to have both, because that will help us really hone in the most. One is more sediment connected, right? But maybe, I guess my question is if folks sort of see the value of those pre-surveys rather than us sort of having a discussion of how to segment this, or we want to do statewide, or we want to only look at large landowners. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, to me, it's like I said earlier, like both of the pre-survey options, like even both, they're not alternative, would make sense because they'll increase efficiency and use the existing information well and end up probably with lower cost overall. So I can't think why we wouldn't do that. Maybe someone should say, no, bad idea, but to me, they seem like they make sense.
Yeah.
I agree.
Does anyone disagree with Wendy that the pre-survey options are appropriate and potentially have some good cost savings or synergies? And
I guess the one question that I have is, and maybe I'm just getting caught up in verbiage, in the table, if I can get back to it. For like pre-survey option 1, it says, reduces time and expense by limiting field data collection to road segments with a higher probability of connectivity. And I just don't want there to be a bias on selecting roads that are connected versus not connected. I mean, like, that would be my concern. I mean, unless connectivity in this specific sentence is saying where there's intersection between roads and streams. I just want to make sure that by doing one of these, we're not inserting bias in anything.
I think maybe think about it a little differently. So we know the miles of roads, we know the miles of streams. This is focusing the field data collection on the places where there's a potential for the two to intersect. Not a road segment that's nowhere near a stream, for example.
So it's, in other words, it's not saying we want to go, we're going to target the worst areas, and this will help us figure out where the worst areas are. But it's saying we want to find where it's possible.
Where there's those intersections. I mean, I think that's what I'm saying. I don't know, it's just the use of the word connectivity in the sentence. It would have been better to say, intersect, to not confuse what we're talking about. But I just want to be clear about that because I don't want there to be bias, but because we add an additional pre-survey data review process. That's my own concern.
Yeah, I think another sort of similar to that is like the population, sample population, or areas or roads where there's potential delivery, and any conclusions outside of that population would be kind of out of bounds, so to speak, in terms of what we can say. I think that's kind of.
I get a temperature check on, I think I'm hearing that generally the group sees the value of both these survey options. So can I just do like a no way to a yes, I like doing both pre-survey options? Fine. We're talking about both of the pre-survey options for the roads, if that is sounding good, and then like all 5 fingers or no way, no hands.
So I apologize. I'm trying to understand the question. Do we want to value? You kind of cut out a couple times. So can you please repeat that?
Yeah, so we're just talking about the pre-survey options for the roads. So the digital data and the GIS LiDAR. And the consensus a little bit in the is that both of those make sense. And so we were just doing a quick temperature check of whether you'd support those pre-survey options, doing both of those. Seeing a head nod.
Head nod, yeah, oh, there's a 5. There's a
Okay,
5 and a
great.
5.
Thank you.
I'm still a 5.
Great. I have just maybe one more question on it. So, I have to be honest, I didn't read those ones too in depth because they were on the pre-survey, so I didn't think about them very hard.
Pre-surveys weren't on the pre-survey.
The pre-survey. So, when it says like less data would have to be collected, can you just further describe that? Like, what would be the line on those? Like, what specific data? It's like gradient, right, or geology, anything that we have GIS data on the landscape already. You could just pull it off of GIS rather than having to go to the site, measure that and elevation. And yeah, I'm just curious how good that coverage is. State, especially like LiDAR, you know, that we're supposed to be getting for LiDAR.
I think it's a
Good,
I
yeah.
think it's pretty good. Yeah.
And we're gonna be less covered.
I think west side it's 100%. We did it.
But as far as accuracy, yeah.
They just take a check those. Talking about pre-survey.
Yeah.
Wait. Linear future like roads stand out, trying to distinguish abandoned roads from current road network ended up being a lot of money and a lot of time, not much gain. It came down to, you should just find abandoned roads in the fields when you're in the field, when you're laying out a harvest unit. That's kind of where we landed on that one, but actually detecting a road network is pretty easy. Using LiDAR, they show up.
No, that's good. It's just a question.
Yeah.
So I haven't worked with the data.
No, yeah, for sure, yeah.
Like I
It's
said,
a
I
good
mean,
question.
I'm always worried about.
I think you're right to be
Site-specifics.
skeptical.
Mhm.
As someone who does a GIS analysis, I would say you're totally right to be skeptical that GIS could solve everything. Because I think, GIS is magic is something that they and I think
Yeah.
it's good to be skeptical as far as like where our roads and where our streams you can see is surprising.
Yeah, well, and I would hope that in that, when we are in the field, if something is not matching up with what the outcome was from the pre-survey analysis, that would be noted by the,
We have to,
by the
Yeah.
field tech.
totally.
So, but I mean, as long as that's happening, like I'm.
Yeah, that's why I was asking about like physical field-based QA.
Yeah.
Good. You pull up that Word document. Sorry.
Okay, sorry, no.
No, you're good.
We were kind of going
You're
back.
jumping around a little bit.
Do you,